That looks good, Chuck. I can see that.
Okay. Okay. Welcome, everyone. Appreciate you joining and being with us today. I hope that you all gain some benefit from this and look forward to any questions that you might have as we go through. I am a retired director of special education that currently is a consultant with the Illinois State Board of Education through ISU and looking at developing a tool that schools can use to evaluate their special education programs. I also am a volunteer consultant advocate for parents, agencies, and school districts when they are experiencing difficulties and needing someone to come in and assist them in looking at reaching consensus. Today's presentation, I'm going to go over things that I have learned over the years and what I'm currently trying to do in regard to all of that, as well as moving you through what I like to call navigating the live stream or becoming a phone book navigator. The web has taken over our phone books for people finding information, but then finding the correct information or information that you really want is a great task that we have to work through to make it be effective for us as we move along. Starting out with the purpose of IDEA, providing the most appropriate educational opportunity to develop the student's abilities to lead a productive and independent life to the maximum extent possible. An excess cost model, which means there's no parent funding for that, for any special education services that a student is to receive. One of the important parts for people to remember and understand is that the disability eligibility terminates at graduation or at the age of 22. And it's necessary for us, and that's the part that I'll be talking about a lot today, is the linkage with the adult agencies. Either they're referred for eligibility to the needed intervention support services and programs, or they have them in place. Expectations provide a basic understanding of rights and responsibilities and other applicable laws. Assist all individuals involved to understand and reach consensus on the development and implementation of a person-centered individual plan. And that is a little bit different language than what we're used to, in that, again, when they become an adult, they really move to a person-centered individual plan. And there are a variety of individual plans. Provide information on the need for coordinated lifelong services and supports for individuals with disabilities through that individual plan. And that is that, again, if they are going to go into adulthood and need lifelong services, then they need to have those connections made. And today we'll be talking mostly about individuals who are moving on into post-secondary education and or into the work world. And so it'll be more of a focus on those two types of populations. And then how to use a collaborative conflict resolution to resolve differences. One of the issues that many parents face and many educators is that it is a very complex system. And this slide just kind of gives you an indication of why it is so complex and the number of federal laws and state laws that apply to it, along with the local aspect of a school district having their own policies and procedures as they interpret the aspects that are listed there under each of the laws in implementing them. One of the things I've learned over a period of time is that you really have to look at developing a life plan. And there are really 3 stages in that life plan. One starts out from birth to 5 or birth to 3. The other then are the educational years from 3 through 22, and then moving into the adult world. And under each of those, the eligibility criteria changes for each area, as well as what services are available. Today, we're going to focus on the transition planning group from 14 and a half to graduation or age 22. And what I would like to do is look at, if you haven't been identified, then what you need to do, or what you can do for requesting to have an evaluation done to qualify for the services, either in an IEP or under Section 504. Equally, looking at some resources, the Office of Civil Rights puts out one, Protecting Students with Disabilities, and it takes you through several different, the interrelationship of IDA and 504. How does OCR get involved? Where can a school district get information? And so this is just a very useful site that can be used for looking at those things and looking at putting them in place. One of the things that I was confused about in talking with folks and talking with educators is, when you talk about a 504 plan for college, they really don't talk 504 in college. And this is a good site to tell you that that is the case, that you don't talk about a 504 in the college, that again, students are eligible for that, but it's different types of supports than what we have in the public schools. One of the other things then when you go to college and for that is looking at defining for faculty there, providing them with background information, which this is an excellent resource for doing on autism, what they might notice, strengths, challenges, strategies, and that is through the ADA program. It's an excellent, excellent resource for providing to both teachers as well as those at the university level in kinds of activities and things that can be carried out in relation to that. Since many of you are already educators, you already know this next part, and that is that we are currently in a phase of stages, tiers, or levels. Everybody is talking in regard to those and looking at the levels of intensity for services. And again, as I've looked at this and outlined them, you have federal, state, and local. Federal trumps state, state trumps local. They don't play well with one another, but that is the scenario that exists there. I've already talked about the 3 stages. We also go through 3 different functions in schools as we go through with students. We start out developmentally, going 3 through kindergarten or 2nd. Academics actually kick in there, and then everybody talks about academics. And then at 18 to 22, roughly, if they haven't graduated, then they begin, or you begin to focus on functional and life skills. We talk about support services and programs. It goes from a general, frequent to intensive level. So generals, everybody, frequent groups, intensive individuals. And actually the very last part of that, everything is built on needs. Interests and priorities can play a role, but the needs are what is really driving all of the activities that go on in relation to this. What does Individuals with Disabilities Education Act say, and who do they serve? There are 13 different categories. We're going to be focusing pretty much on autism. Most of you are probably familiar with this definition and terminology already. What is an autism spectrum disorder? Currently, it's defined by the DSM-5, which is a recent revision in regard to that, and the International Classification of Diseases. And that's why we hear from CDC in regard to what autism and the prevalence rate of it. Three of the characteristics that they list there: the engagement in repetitive activities, the resistance to environmental change, and the unusual responses to sensory experiences are things that are typically experienced by all individuals with autism. It's just to varying degrees of intensity in regard to those. Again, those of you who are educators in the PK-12 system, you are very familiar with this aspect. I really like this document that the state has come up with in looking at the 7 areas, because it does really capture the areas of impact that you have for an autistic individual. And with that, they will have varying levels. They may have one area impacted, they may have several areas impacted. The difficulty you run into when you have a high functioning individual that has minimal impact is, do they then qualify for services, and or what services do they get in relation to that as they move through what they are experiencing in their life due to their impact from autism. 226230 is the Illinois Administrative Code that governs what Illinois does in relation to this. And this talks about the IEP and starting at age 14 and a half, updated there annually thereafter. We'll touch on some age-appropriate assessments and take a look at those in regard to kinds of things that people are doing with that. What is the purpose of the transition services in helping students to progress and graduate into adulthood? Again, as I said earlier, many laws impact. The Illinois School Code also has additional requirements related to this. And in the state of Illinois, the age of majority is age 18. And looking at home-based support services for individuals who are developmentally disabled, and autism falls under developmentally disabled language in adulthood. And so that's why it's necessary to look at that home-based service part as you're moving through transition. Then what are transition services? And again, that's defined for us in the codified federal regulations at 300.43. The underlying young adult is something that I have put in there because we have the mindset, as I've experienced it, from people that we're still viewing these 14 and a half to 22 years as children. And they really are not. They are young adults at that point in time. They're going to move into adulthood. They're going to be needing to be their own self-advocates. They're going to need to be able to function in an adult world, and unfortunately the parents are not always going to have say over that. And so the more we can begin to think of them as young adults and attaching that to them, the better they're going to be served in regard to what they can do and or how they further develop in regard to that. The U.S. Code definition of developmental disability, and this again is in here because it does begin to change what you're looking at in regard to, or when a student is leaving school, you need to reestablish eligibility. And that eligibility is defined by developmental disability and what that looks like and who is doing that or how they are doing that. And looking at the learning aspect is the one that impacts mostly for getting a 504 if you're going to go on to college. But it can be any of the areas that are listed there as long as it's a major life activity that is impacted by what they are doing. The Americans with Disabilities Act is one of the laws in adulthood that will cover them. And again, you can see that it's a physical or mental impairment that substantially eliminates, or there's a record of such an impairment that you're treating that individual as though they have that disability, even though they may not have it identified, but you've provided accommodations, you've provided support, you've done other things in relation to that, that takes the student to that point in getting there. The other then is the Rehabilitation Act of 1973, or Section 504, and it again also states the B there, physical or mental impairment that constitutes or results in a substantial impediment to employment. The other that is just kind of administrative jargon in regard to how they pass these laws and put those into effect. But you can see that again, it's heavily impacted by legal aspects to the point that courts are involved, and you can even get to, and several decisions have been made in regard to individuals with disabilities by the Supreme Court, and they set standards. They also then change practices because if there's a new court ruling, then the districts have to put that in place on behalf of individuals. Key services needed to support individuals with autism. And there are a number of those in regard to students on the spectrum in what they are doing and where they are at with things. And students can qualify for any number of those. And should they need those supports and services, we'll look at here shortly as to where they can go to get those provided to them and what kinds of things will occur in regard to that for them being able to be identified and having those services provided to them. Advocate and consult here really is not only us as individuals, but is also the individual themselves advocating for what they need. And again, one of the things in my earlier slide, I showed you the 3 stages that people go for. We really need to assist parents and those individuals and staff to understand, be prepared for the next level and be adulthood oriented. Very difficult to do when you're 3 and you're looking at 18 to 22, but at that point, they're going to get there and they will have to be their own self-advocates. Always explain the need based on data. Data is the driving force for every decision that's made in regard to an individual. And the more we can think in that term and drive them to think in that term, the better off they will be. We have to remember that it's always an individual choice for us in education that can include parent guardian input. But our focus is always on the individual and the individual making decisions for what they want to have happen in their life. Network services. Get other agencies involved. Always be willing to find out if an agency should be involved. Get help when needed. Look for positive solutions. Always be moving toward a solution and hopefully getting the best of the worst situations when those kinds of things occur. Be an active team member. Communicate, provide input on the plan development. Provide input. And the last one there is pretty much the DEI philosophy that's existing today, and looking at diversity, equity, inclusion, being culturally correct, and gaining access. Always advocate for the access to necessary services and intents and the kinds of things that can occur in relation to that. Strategies. Whenever you're making a decision or looking at things, always ask the question, for what purpose are we doing this? When I was a director, many parents would, inclusion versus least restrictive environment was a huge argument. I always ask, for what purpose? Why are you wanting the student in that general education classroom, or wanting them to be in a self-contained classroom? Help me understand. Great question that you can always ask somebody when you're not, because again, we speak in our own terminology. We get hung up on our own acronyms. One of the things that I found is that if you ask the question, can you help me understand? It really opens up the dialogue and people begin to talk. Put it on the table. Don't skirt the issue. If there is an issue, face the issue, put the issue on the table, talk about it, get it resolved. Communicate. Be specific. If there's something specifically you want, be specific about that. One of my favorite ones today are allowing a student frequent breaks. What does that mean? Can they be gone a half an hour in a frequent break? Are they going to get a dozen of those within a day? You want to define what that looks like so that people aren't viewing that somebody's taking advantage, or that, gee, I've got to provide this. Be as specific as you can. Again, collecting data before making a decision. Determine what is needed. We operate a lot on priorities and looking at interests and preferences. Those are great, but the bottom line need is what you needing to address and or put in place. We know we're going to have conflict. What I like to look at is using collaborative conflict resolution to reach consensus. You've got to talk through it. You've got to come up with what's everybody going to agree to? How are we going to get there? Talk through it, battle through that. Offer your expertise and get it documented, whether you're an individual, whether you're the parent, whether you're teaching, whatever service you're providing, use that expertise, but make sure that you document it. If it's not documented, it didn't happen. Explain the need based on data. Again, priorities, needs, interests, preferences, and assessments. Ongoing assessment is key. because hopefully if we're doing our jobs, it's going to change, it's going to be positive, they're going to grow. You want to make sure that you're measuring that so that you can understand what the needs are and deal with the interests and preferences that somebody provides. Again, you want to document implemented services and supports. There are several emotional activities involved in this, and you need to capture what you're going to do in those activities, in those moments. Individual planning meetings is one. Very emotional for both the parents and the student or individual. Usually they are outnumbered in those meetings. They may not have educational background or training like we have, so they're very nervous and anxious about that, and we're asking them to make rational decisions during an emotional time. Transition points, moving from early childhood into education, into adulthood, even moving between classes. Some students have transition issues, even moving from subject to subject. Those are emotional times and needing to address what we're going to do with those. And interviews, and when you're looking at adulthood and going for a job, again, how do you control the emotions and teaching them to be able to control their emotions and become regulated if they're dysregulated. And then the last one, which we all have, is learning to handle frustration, because having an individual with a disability and living with a disability, you run into a lot of frustration. And how are you going to take that on and attack that? And this is my favorite. This kind of ends this part of the presentation, which is the slideshow presentation. And it's, what it's all about: skills to pay the bills. You have to have those in order to be successful. And this is a document that I have found, and I'll pull it up here in just a second, but it talks about soft skills and what to do in a workplace. It also offers different activities that you can do to move forward in regard to looking at how you can teach these skills to individuals so that they can be successful in what they're doing. It kind of takes care of the slideshow. Is there anything that anybody has a question in regard to that they'd like me to answer at this point in time? Okay. Next, I'd like to go over some of the connections and some of the things that I use in regard to looking at how to meet the needs of individuals and what we can do in relation to that. Secondary transition. When you're going through your secondary transition part, this document really needs to be completed carefully. And this is the state's version of this. But again, when you're looking at age-appropriate transition assessments, there are a few out there, and finding what those are, how those are going to be completed is critical. Looking at the post-secondary outcomes, be as specific as you possibly can in relation to those. Having those put in place is important. From 14 and a half to 16, you're going to focus on the course of study mostly, because many agencies do not become involved during those years. And so you're going to need to look at what you're doing in regard to that and where you're at for that. If you're going to move on into 22, then they're going to be looking at putting in more functional life skills on the extended end of that and looking at what you'll do during that time frame. For transition planning, if you are looking to invite agencies, the agencies must be in, you must get consent from the parent in order to do that. This is a state form. This isn't necessarily the type of form that all the districts use, but this one kind of identifies who the different agencies are and that you give permission for them to be invited to a particular meeting in regard to an individual. The summary of performance is completed after the student leaves school. And the aspect for this that really becomes critical is what are the services that that individual is going to need in adulthood. What happens a lot is that schools put in the things that they're currently doing and the things that they're currently receiving. And the difficulty with that is none of that goes into adulthood. You really have to look at this document as one that an individual can take into adulthood in order to have it be effective and be something that's useful to them when they are moving forward in relation to that. PACERS, the National Parent Center on Transition and Employment, is an outstanding resource for folks for a variety of different materials and things that they can do in regard to providing information. This one is ADA, Section 504, and post-secondary education. There are questions that they list in relation to that that address all of those ongoing issues and what they're looking at with it and how they're doing that. And they have a lot of other documents that they provide and make available to people. But this one is an excellent one for looking at the differences that we've been talking about so far in regard to this. Your rights under Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act, what it is, who's protected, and this is again out of the Office of Civil Rights because both 504 and IEPs are civil rights legislation that specifically address an individual. And so in violating those, you are violating their individual rights. And again, this is an excellent document just talking about rights under 504. Again, this is one that some districts use, and it just is a brief summary of rights that parents have during the educational years and how to go through filing for due process or filing a complaint in regard to that if you're not happy with what is currently going on in regard to it. One of the areas that becomes very critical for individuals is when should I disclose my autism and whether you should disclose it or not. You should disclose it if you want supports and services. If you don't want supports and services and you think you can function, then you don't have to disclose that. If you're going to receive any adult services, it will be necessary for you to disclose what your disability is, or in this particular case, for autism, when and why you would look at providing that. This is an excellent document put out by the Protection and Advocacy Organization and talks about College Vocational Student Guide. Again, Section 504, what is it? What are the major life activities? moving on to college or a vocational school, because 504 does go into both of those environments as well as the work environment. But this is an excellent article and outline of what those different things are and how to maneuver into moving forward for going on into adulthood. Advocacy resources. If you're looking for an advocacy supports, again, this is a document that the Illinois State Board of Education puts out, but it lists varying organizations who provide advocacy supports and services to individuals, and is readily available for that. Parent advocates, local services. Again, this is a state document that goes through and it shows you the different places where services are available, and what you can do in regard to getting those services and what kinds of things can happen in relation to that, and or if you need help. I'm currently working with the Living Independent centers throughout the state to develop 5-6 page documents that we can give to parents to have them better understand different processes that they run into, that they can use as a ready reference for looking at what they can do when they're looking to get an evaluation for their child, or they're going to go into a domain meeting. And so the life skills are an excellent resource for folks to contact to get information and additional supports. This is a document that I came up that, again, as you're looking at self-advocacy on behalf of students, when you're looking at what you want them to think about as they're moving into adulthood, this is a good sheet for them to complete that addresses a lot of the different issues of going on to school, going to work. Are there significant medical problems that they might face that they would need to look at and or gather information on and do as they move forward in dealing with that in adulthood? Self-advocacy is a significant issue in adulthood. I will say, sorry, educators, that we don't do a really good job of teaching students how to be good, their own self-advocates. One of our issues is that in education, we are mandated. So we call the meetings, we make sure that they're there. We go after them and get permissions and do all of that. When they go into adulthood, it is on them to initiate those actions and activities. And if they don't, they're dropped from those services. So anything that we can do for individuals understanding what their disability is, how it impacts them, what they need in the way of services, and what they can do in order to advocate for themselves is something that we should do and can do very effectively. We just need to have it as a focus for. But this is an excellent document, again, to provide for somebody to begin looking at being their own self-advocate and what they can do. Here's another one looking at a self-assessment on behalf of a student that, again, is through the ADA program, and that is through the ICSPS that Kirsten was talking about earlier. In looking at on their website, you can go to their website and find this. But again, this is something to get students ready to go to college. What do they do? What do they want to do? And they can self-score this and look and see where their needs are and what kinds of things they need to do or want to do in regard to moving forward, or where they might need additional assistance in being successful. And then this is that document that I had on my slideshow, the skills to pay the bills. And this is just, again, a whole book on what to do in looking at different aspects: communication, teamwork, problem solving. And as you go through, it then comes into different activities that you can do and use for implementing these different kinds of concepts for them. Universal design for learning is a critical component for people to understand and to work through in regard to things for that. The next area that I want to go, and these are websites that I have found to be pretty effective and pretty good for looking at things. Again, I referenced this one earlier in the U.S. Department of Education and through the Office of Civil Rights and Protecting Students with Disabilities, frequently asked questions. This is from Heartland Community College, and all community college, well, most community colleges and colleges have offices of disability or student access and accommodation services is one of the more popular names of those entities within the secondary, post-secondary areas. And I brought this one up to show you some of the types of supports and services that are available that are much different than the ones that we offer in the public schools. They can obtain testing assistance, they can get textbook materials, they can have note takers, you can do preferential seating, but it's much more limited availability of supports and services than we have available in the public schools that we offer. And so again, it's becoming familiar with what in your particular area. And again, it's critical to look at your area because each area is different in what they do, or each agency or university can determine what services they want to offer and make those available to the students or individuals. One of the local resources here in Bloomington Normal is Autism McLean. It's a local non-for-profit that serves to connect individuals and families living with autism in McLean County. And the reason I bring this up is on our website, I'm a member of the Autism McLean. We have developed a little book of resources that is very extensive in regard to looking at a whole host of issues in regard to autism and what it has available to it, as well as other activities that we have. But that book is available in electronic format, and again, in hardcover format that covers resources statewide as well as here locally in McLean County, both parent support groups as well as evaluation opportunities and where you can get evaluated for autism. If anybody knows good sites, please list those in the chat room. You know, finding somebody that can do an outside evaluation in a very short time is a challenging issue for all of us. DHS is the primary agency within the state of Illinois that provides services to adults, and you have to become qualified under DHS and the different umbrella departments that it services. Rehabilitation, the Division of Rehabilitation is one of those. And so this is their website, and just listing the different aspects that they cover and where you can go to get different information in regard to disability information, different levels of what they can provide. Again, you can see that they are on both ends of the spectrum here. Child services, they do the early intervention services from birth to 3. Then they also do the adulthood. If you're not familiar with Equip for Equality, go to their website. They have a number of different types of documents that they can provide, as well as supports that they can provide to you to be successful or to move forward on different issues that you might be running into. Don't know if you're familiar with Illinois ABLE, but it is the financial arm, or helping individuals get financial independence within the state of Illinois. It is run by the state of Illinois. The Illinois Assistive Technology Program, and again, health benefits for workers with disabilities. If you are able to qualify for that, there are those resources that can help in relation to it. Autism Training and Technical Assistance Project, Kirsten referenced this one earlier. They have a whole host of resources. You saw 2 or 3 of the different ones that I was going through and using, and do use and provide to schools as an excellent source. Transition, again, finding those age-appropriate transition assessments. Indiana University has a really good transition assessment matrix that they use, and you can go on that site and click in, you choose a domain, grade level, disability area, and it kicks out different types of resources that are available to you, ways that you can look at completing inventories and or looking at assessments that you might be able to complete. It's pretty comprehensive, and one that I have used. I did a short stint in a private school, and we used their assessment matrix to look at the individuals and begin to plan for students in what we were doing. Again, another excellent source for instruction in self-advocacy is the INTAC, the collaborative, the National Technical Assistance Center on Transition. They offer a lot of other resources as well, but this is a good description of self-advocacy and the kinds of things that you can do in regard to that, and reaching out and moving into person-centered planning, which is a key component in, again, at the secondary level, in moving forward and looking at what you can do and how you can receive the most appropriate programming and supports. Peer mentoring, if you have peer mentoring available to you in different places, then it's one that can be effective. Best Buddies, if you're familiar with Best Buddies, they're a rather large or statewide, nationwide organization that is providing a lot more services as they continue to evolve over time with things in regard to that. Are there, I'll stop here. Are there questions that anybody has, or at this point, or things they would like me to cover that I haven't been covering?
I don't see any questions in the chat right now, Chuck. but
Okay.
we'll give everyone a couple seconds. So if you would like to ask a question, feel free to type it in the chat, or you can raise your virtual hand and we can unmute you and you could ask it live. You can also post in the Q&A as well. Or even if you just have a comment and would like to discuss something. Okay, someone said, will we have access to this presentation and resources? Yes, you will, Leslie. In your follow-up email tomorrow, there will be a URL link that will take you directly to where the presentation and the recording will be. The recording takes about 48 working hours though, so you might have to go back to that URL. But the presentation should be up by tomorrow. And then you'll also have a follow-up survey in that follow-up email too. But that URL will take you to our website, which is where a lot of the resources that Chuck was sharing are located at. And then you'll have his presentation too with all of those resources highlighted.
Yeah, I have, whoops, why'd that come up? Oh, I started down here.
Yeah, and Chuck, anything you want to share with us, we can put that up on our website too. So if you have like this list of resources, we'd be.
Yeah, I can do that. I actually created a list of all of the resources in that, that again, if you want copies of those or whatever, this is the page that I came up with in regard to that, and the different kinds of things. And we can go through a couple of these other ones here since we have some time and can look at doing that. And then I have a whole list of differing websites that are ones that I have used that I can make available to everyone as well in looking at varying items and issues. Again, I've kind of picked the ones looking at post-secondary schooling and employment. There are also several in there in regard to living arrangements and more severely impacted individuals and the things that they might need for additional supports that aren't listed or that I haven't shown you yet in regard to that. If you're not familiar with the Job Accommodation Network, that's an excellent resource for looking at types of accommodations and different things that can be done in a workplace and how to go about asking to get those, what kinds of things can be done in relation to it, where do you go in regard to getting additional resources for individuals in their work world, and that's an excellent resource for that. The National Association for Secondary Education and Transition is another one. Social Security Administration, I haven't done a lot with that with you, but again, many of the students qualify for Social Security, or if any of you have worked through Social Security in getting somebody approved and the difficulties and challenges that it presents, they do have some different materials that they offer as well in regard to that and what you can do. The Transition Coalition is another group that works well in bridging that gap between public schools and adulthood for looking at what you need to do, what kinds of things are good to be learning at that point in time, and where that might need to be emphasized for them. If you've not worked with the Division of Specialized Care for Children, they're an excellent organization as well, and they have a lot of information on transition and have a lot of different kinds of transition timelines. And they do it more in relation to medical issues, as well as looking at employment types of things for that. One of the excellent legal resources that a lot of people use is Rights Law, and looking at it in regard to a whole host of questions, and they'll they'll offer answers on almost any topic that you've run into as an educator or even as a parent in regard to this, or as a post-secondary education person. And it's just an excellent resource to look at and use for getting information on what the law says and or getting an opinion from them in regard to issues that they've responded to on behalf of others. So again, if you want any of those, we'll make this available to you as well in regard to that activity. I referenced earlier home-based support services. Here's a document from from the Department of Human Resources on home-based support services and what they are and how they go about delivering things, person-centered planning, again, different types of materials that they have available that you can use for specific instances or information that you're looking for. There are a host of individual transition timelines out there. I put this one together to look at necessary activities that are going to occur, not necessarily what you should be doing and that kind of thing. It's more of looking at what's going to happen or what's going to be occurring. Starting at age 13 to get people ready for age 14 and a half. And that's to inform the parents about transition planning, because a lot of things change in transition planning. Again, informing parents that notice will be provided to the student at this point in time. The student will start attending, be invited to attend, starting at age 14 and a half. Again, two of the things that I've touched on: promoting person-centered planning and self-advocacy. Those are things that you should do on an annual basis and begin doing at that point if you've not already started, because they're going to have to do that when they hit adulthood. At age 14 and a half, begin the process of completing questionnaires, surveys, and interest inventories. Look at doing those annually. You can vary those. You don't have to do all of them and repeat them every year. Look at different ones. Look at based on talents, based on abilities, based on interests, preferences. Invite the individual student to their IEP meeting. For the most part, a lot of what you're going to do during those two grade levels is determining the course of study. Are you going to look at an academic, or are you going to move towards more of a functional skill curriculum in regard to what you'll be doing? Discuss and determine education through diploma or age 22. Begin to identify the potential adult needs and looking for agency referrals. Not many agencies are going to become involved at that age level. Typically, doors and those types of agencies aren't going to want to get involved until age 16. Some students may already be involved with agencies as you reach that age range. If you do, you're going to want to include those agencies and get that parent permission to invite the agencies that I've outlined earlier. Refer for pre-admission screening agent. If you're going to be looking at puns and they're going to do that, you're going to want to find where your or who your screening agent is, because they're going to need to be connected to that agency in regard to that. Discuss document SSI, SSDI, any medical needs or therapies that might be needed at that particular point in time. I know that by law, they attach the PUNS information to every one of the procedural guidelines that you may offer to parents annually. Really only highlight there the PUNS in that if the student is developmentally disabled. There's really not a point for everybody to get it because many of them aren't going to qualify for those services. So I understand why legally you have to do it, but it's a waste of paper for that particular aspect other than for individuals who are developmentally disabled. Then some of the natural ones, driver's education. Again, continuing to review the medical needs, begin to invite the outside agencies. Driver's ed, make that decision. Register for PUNS. You can register for PUNS at any time. The tricky part becomes in getting eligible for services for PUNS and how that matches or interfaces with education and what to do in regard to that. Only in the state of Illinois do we have a lottery for adult services. But if you receive that, many parents that I work with review that as they won the golden ticket because it will pay for almost all services in adulthood, depending on the type of service. And there are many different particular aspects of all of that you will need to become immersed in, and using your agent to help you continue to navigate that field is critical. At age 17, you'll get a notice of rights at age of majority, which in the state of Illinois is age 18. And so they become their own adult at age 18. Begin to think about or make a determination on guardianship and what you might want to do. Again, Equip for Equality does an excellent job on guardianship and providing information for guardianship and the kinds of things that the types of guardianship that are available. When I first started, when you talked about guardianship, it was getting your child declared incompetent to take over guardianship. Today, there's the whole range of guardianship issues and guardianship terms and things that you can put in place for partial guardianship and different things of that nature. At age 17, see if you can obtain a functional vocational evaluation. And again, if anybody out there, any of you participating, know of somebody who does functional vocational evaluations, please put that in the chat. It would be very helpful to me to find that out. I've recently had a need to go and find one and have found that within the state of Illinois, those are extremely limited in regard to availability. At age 18, that's adulthood for the student. You can obtain a delegation of rights for educational decisions, which means that you as an IEP team or the parent can make the decisions if the individual at age 18 gives permission for that. If not, they then start making their own decisions. We then approach them. Parent is then provided a conference notice, but it's up to the individual as to whether or not and what role a parent will play at that point in time. Register for the draft, do voter registration. You look at making that decision. We talked about home-based services. In the IEP, you then make that determination, and that's when DHS, doors, public aid, all potentially could become involved. Begin to apply for post-secondary services and supports. Apply for transit services if needed, looking at adulthood. From 19 to 22, deal with the Medicaid waiver eligibility and getting that put in place. Understand termination of IDEA eligibility and services. It ends. It is over. It is done. And nothing that you've gotten up to this point in time goes into adulthood. It's reevaluating and reestablishing eligibility for an individual for services that are available in adulthood. Hopefully you already have some of the adult services in place. Again, back to the summary of performance for adult agencies. That's after the student has been terminated and everything is complete. You then do the summary of performance right for supports and services necessary in adulthood. And you'll be working through and working on adult living skill development and functional performance during that time and looking at that as you move forward with things. I put this one in to show you kind of the differences. If you remember back to the slide that Heartland had in regard to some of the limited availability of services, you can understand some of the kind of difference that parents run into in looking at, here's the list of services that are potentially available in education, and you may have less than a dozen available to you in adulthood. But these, and again, if you're not familiar, these are all the listed services, and it's not an exhaustive list of potential services that a student can receive under their IEP. Complete guide to thriving in trade school and beyond. Trade schools do look at 504. They look at it differently. It's not going to be the 504 plan that you have in high school or through the schools. But they do have 504, and 504 does have an impact more to them than, as I said earlier, in the college one, where they don't necessarily talk 504 plans. Trade schools will. And this is just kind of a blurb from them in regard to 504 and available services and just some different kinds of, this is their propaganda, providing greater independence, increased confidence, etc. But they really do offer good explanation and good supports through trade schools. And this is a document that I found that was very helpful in looking at that as you're talking with them in regard to what kinds of things they can expect to get in the way of supports if they go into a technical trade school as opposed to going into a community college or a post-secondary institution. And they have their own timeline that they recommend from high school to trade school and the kinds of activities that you can carry out in relation to that and where that would go and how that would play out for them and tips that they offer in regard to it. Who can help with success stories and a glossary, but it's a pretty excellent document in regard to what they offer in the trade schools and where they're at in regard to that. And so the other thing that I'd like to look at is again in, whoops, okay, it must be At this point, I'd like to stop sharing my screen and find out if there's anything that you all are interested in, or other things that I can offer at this point in time. Um,
There's no more questions in the chat, but again, feel free to make any questions or comments for Chuck in the chat, or raise your hand and I can unmute you. We have about 10 minutes left, roughly. And if while you are typing those or thinking of any, just want to reiterate that we will have the presentation and the resources that Chuck provides us up on our website within about 48 hours. The recording will be up there as well, and you'll receive the link for that in a follow-up email tomorrow. And then we also will have a follow-up survey in that link, and we would appreciate your feedback. The ADA Professional Development Committee does take into account those surveys, and we look on there. There's a question that if there's any future autism related topics that you would like to hear about, that you can type that in the survey, and we do look at those as we're planning future professional development, especially for this upcoming fiscal year in FY24, which starts July 1st for us. We'll be looking towards this fall and next spring, providing professional development webinars as well. So if there's a topic that you would specifically like to hear a session on, we would love to be able to provide that for you. So fill out that follow-up survey, and we do look at those and collect data from them and use that in our planning.
Again, if you don't have any questions or anything at this point, I can go back to sharing my screen and can pull up some additional handouts that we have and run through some of those if you have an interest in my doing that.
Sure, Chuck, if you want to. We have about 9 minutes left.
Okay.
And then I'm also going to put in the chat here the registration link for July's monthly webinar. We have a really interesting session on sexuality and the spectrum, lessons on sex, dating, and love, autism style. And we are going to be hearing from Amy Gravino, who is a consultant, public speaker, and founder of her consulting firm. And so she's also currently authoring a book about her experiences with the relationship, dating, and sexuality as a woman on the autism spectrum. So make sure you register for that as well. I went ahead and put that link in the chat, and that will be on July 12th at 10 a.m.
This one is put out by the Social Security Administration, and again, it's a checklist for an adult disability interview. If you are going to look at going for Social Security benefits, this is a document that they put out as far as what material that you might want to bring or need to bring to this in order to help move that meeting along and to look at making sure that you might meet their guidelines. Again, one of the things that I have heard and worked with parents is that they're turned down initially in regard to qualifying for Social Security, and sometimes it takes 2 or 3 opportunities for meeting with them to get that approved, as well as looking at potentially getting an attorney. There are attorneys out there that do specifically assist individuals with Social Security in getting SSDI and helping through that process. One that I have come across in different, this one is always one that gets changed over time as to how you refer to a person and the kinds of things that when you're addressing them. And Um, this is one that I came across that emphasizes people first language, which has been around for a long time. But again, I've run into some individuals who prefer to just be referred to as I'm autistic and talk to me as an autistic individual as opposed to I'm a person with autism. And so even though there's guidance out there, you may run into people who prefer to go ahead and say, hey, I'm autistic. I'll own that and I'm okay with that. And if you have an individual that does have medical needs, I found this to be a pretty good, helpful one as well, in getting some tips and some questions to ask in regard to an adult health care provider, how to go about finding them, and questions that you can ask. And again, this is through the DSCC, and they really have a lot of good material like this available to individuals when you're looking for a variety of different aspects. Respite services, again, the Department of Human Services for customers, there's a whole host of activities that they are responsible for and provide. And you can go on their website and check into any of these. I had the disability and rehabilitation one up earlier, but you can see where you can gather information about all the different services that DHS provides to you by going on their website. And if you're a provider, you can go in and get information in regard to the kinds of things that you need to know as a provider in regard to various activities that you might be carrying out and what you might need to do with that. Illinois One Stops, there's a list of those. Again, you can just do One Stop Illinois, and this will come up for you, letting you know where there are different One Stop employment sites, workforce centers, people that will provide with employment opportunities or move you into employment and support you in regard to finding employment. Plan to achieve self-support if you're ever looking for that. And again, this gets to looking at employment opportunities and having a disability and what you can do in regard to qualifying for getting additional supports and services in regard to a pass application. Vocational functional limitations evaluation. DOORS will typically do this in looking at it, having this available to look at and determining the level. DOORS does a level of intensity of service. So again, the milder your impact, the less services you're going to get from them if you even qualify. But they use this to identify the different domains that you might need assistance in and how you go about getting that and where you might fall within their rating system for determining participation and level of service. And then they create a report in regard to that, identifying the different weaknesses and where you're at and what you might have based upon their evaluation that they did. Oh, this is one that I did for, this is pretty much pre-K through 12, in looking at how do I navigate the system? You know, who do I call? Who do again, many of the parents that I talk to don't, when I say, who's your case manager? They're like, who's that? And so it's getting familiar with that term. Who is the case manager? But this just kind of gives you a hierarchy of schools and who to contact, and gives you a way of documenting who you've contacted or who the person is. And again, I've updated it to not just who to call, but who to text, who to email, since those are the more common ways in which we currently communicate in today's world. Well, I hope you found this helpful and got some useful information from it.
Yes, thank you so much, Chuck. We really appreciate your time today, and your expertise and all of the amazing resources that you shared. I think it's definitely going to be beneficial for the system, and we'll have Chuck share those resources and have them linked on our website as well. All right. I don't see any other questions in the chat. So again, Chuck, we really appreciate your time this morning. And thank you so much for everyone who joined us. Hopefully, like Chuck said, you did find this session beneficial, and the session is being recorded. So you can feel free to share the recording out to any of your colleagues or other stakeholders that you feel like might benefit from this session. And we appreciate your time this morning, and I'll go ahead and close us out. Thank you so much, Chuck.
Thank you.